Before we get started, if you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call from the link in the description. And if you want this training along with its respective document, then again, make sure to join the free community from the link in the description. And if you want weekly newsletters on how to improve in every aspect of your life, then make sure to join the free newsletter, again, from the link in the description. With that said, let's get started and talk about how your mind is broken and why you don't even know it yet. So your mind, the thing you use to make every single decision, process every emotion, and interpret every experience, is running on old conditioning, where patterns you absorbed years ago, most of them during childhood or adolescence, are still running your daily life without you even knowing it. And even though you think you're making conscious choices and you think your reactions are rational and you think the way you see the world is accurate, for the most part, you're wrong, because the mind you're living with right now carries flaws, blind spots, and loops that most people go their entire lives without ever stopping to examine. Now, your mind runs on patterns that were formed during the earliest and most formative periods of your life. And those patterns made sense at the time. They were adaptive responses to the environment you were already in. But most of them are completely mismatched to the life you're living now, and they're causing problems you can't really see because you've never stepped back far enough to actually examine them. So the patterns formed during a period when you had very little understanding of the world and very limited tools for processing experience, which means your core operating patterns were essentially designed by a child's brain, and you've been running on that child's logic ever since without really updating it. And these patterns persist because they're wired deep into your mind, below the level of conscious awareness, which means you can't just decide to change them through willpower or positive thinking. They require a specific kind of sustained examination to even become visible, let alone to modify. And the patterns are invisible precisely because they've been running for so long that they feel like reality rather than interpretation. And you can't question something you don't even realize is a choice, which is why most people live their entire lives inside patterns they never chose and never examined. And the mismatch between old patterns and current reality is where most of your problems actually originate, where the anxiety, the self-doubt, the procrastination, the relationship difficulties, the self-sabotage that you experience aren't random malfunctions. They're the predictable output of patterns that were designed for a completely different context. Anxiety, for example, is often an old pattern's response to perceived threat in a situation that your adult self can clearly see is not that threatening. But the pattern fires anyway because it was installed at a time when similar situations actually were threatening, and the pattern doesn't know the difference between then and now. And self-sabotage is usually a pattern designed to protect you from a specific type of failure or rejection that was genuinely dangerous in an earlier context, but now it's just preventing you from taking risks that would actually move your life forward, and you can't override it until you understand what it's trying to protect you from. And beyond individual patterns, your mind also runs loops, meaning recurring cycles of thought, emotion, and behavior that play out the same way every time they're triggered, and those loops can run for years or decades without you ever realizing that you're stuck in one. So if you look at your life honestly, you'll probably notice that certain situations keep producing the same outcome, and that you most likely get into the same situations over and over again, where you keep ending up in the same kinds of conflicts or making the same kinds of mistakes or feeling the same kinds of frustration, and that repetition is the signature of a loop that's running below your conscious awareness. So recognizing the loop is the first and hardest step because the loop has been running for so long that it feels like normal life rather than a pattern, and most people need some form of a structured self-examination like journaling to even see it, because the loop is literally the lens through which they see everything, so they can't see the lens itself. And so the cost of running these loops without awareness is enormous, because every repetition of the loop wastes time, energy, and opportunity, and the cumulative cost over years and decades of unconscious looping is genuinely staggering when you finally add it up. And every loop has a trigger, meaning a specific external or internal event that activates the pattern and starts the cycle. And identifying the trigger is the key to interrupting the loop, because once you can see the trigger, you can catch the pattern before it runs its full course. And the trigger is usually much simpler and more specific than you'd expect, and it's usually simple, where it might be a certain tone of voice or a specific type of feedback or a particular time of day or even a physical sensation. And once you identify it, you can start noticing it everywhere, which gives you multiple opportunities per day to actually practice interrupting the loop. And the gap between the trigger and the response is where all the power lives, because in that gap you have the choice to run the old pattern or to do something different. And expanding that gap through awareness is literally the mechanism by which you rewrite your own operating system. And so the most concerning part of all of this is the blindness, meaning you can't see your own patterns and loops from inside them any more than a fish can see water. And that blindness is really what keeps most people stuck in the same cycles for their entire lives, despite genuinely wanting to change. Now, your mind has a built-in bias towards confirming its existing patterns. We've talked about this many times, meaning it actively filters your experience to reinforce what it already believes. And that confirmation bias makes it extremely difficult to see evidence that contradicts your established patterns, which is why change feels so hard even when you're trying. And so your mind runs everything you experience through a perceptual filter, meaning it quietly decides which details of reality you notice and which ones of reality you ignore. And it works both ways. It shows you evidence for your existing beliefs and hides evidence against them. And the result is a closed loop where your pattern creates your perception and your perception reinforces your patterns. And every day that you operate inside the pattern without examining it, the pattern gets slightly stronger and slightly more entrenched, which means the cost of inaction compounds in the same way that the benefits of journaling compound, just in the opposite direction. And most people's strategy for dealing with their broken mind is entirely external, meaning they try to change their circumstances, their relationships, their jobs, and their environments, hoping that a change of scenery will somehow fix the internal patterns. And it never works because the patterns travel with you. So you've probably seen this in yourself or in people you know, where someone changes their job or relationship or even their city, and within a few months they've recreated the exact same problems in just a different context. And that's because the patterns that created those problems were never addressed. They just got a new backdrop. So they worked on the symptom rather than the root of the issue. And the fix has to be internal, meaning you have to address the patterns themselves rather than the situations they create. And that internal work is exactly what a properly structured journaling practice is really designed to do. So let's talk about the repair mechanism. So if your mind is running on broken patterns and you can't see them from the inside, the way you fix it is deceptively simple. You write, not randomly, not when you feel like it, not about whatever pops in your head, but